Not once, but yes.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to Not Once for Yes. Greetings, lovely listeners. We're coming to you today with a slightly different episode. We've still got ghost stories and haunted history galore, fear not. But this show takes a little step back from our usual format. And we've actually been meaning to do some episodes like this for ages, and we just somehow haven't quite got around to it. You all know that our episodes can be quite long.
Quite long?
Very long.
Exceptionally. Dissertation length long?
Yeah, they seem to be getting longer. But despite that, we always seem to end up with a ton of stuff, really interesting stuff that we desperately want to share with you guys that just doesn't fit into the script. It doesn't sort of have anywhere particular to sit. It doesn't flow nicely. And we always mean to do kind of a follow-up episode so we can share all those interesting little tidbits with you. And we just never get around to it.
Yeah, and it's not just the things that don't quite flow right either. There's quite a few things that we discard because we're sticklers for corroborating things.
Yeah.
Like, I'll often get Lil shout out from the office, like, can you check if George IV wore a red hat on the second day after his coronation, please? Because she's busy trying to check up some bizarre story.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, and sets you off on a little Google Foo adventure.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't corroborate it, we tend to just leave it out. And you have some of these awesome little stories that don't quite make it in just because we can't back them up.
Absolutely. And not just things that we can't back up either. Sometimes the information that we would need to make it into a proper full episode is just not there. And we've got a perfect example of this in this episode. We've got a wonderful haunted pub. We've got the ghost stories. We have absolutely zero history.
Yeah.
Cannot find any, and we'll get into all of that later. But it's such a shame that we're missing out on all these juicy stories and really interesting little bits. And we kind of wanted to do some catch-up, some sort of extra little episodes where we go back and just get to discuss that kind of thing.
Just for completionism, there is a third type of situation where we don't put stories in. And that's when we track down the information to a particular book and we look for a particular book, and it's been out of print since 1794. And there's 3 copies and it's £4,000 each. And you're just like,
I know.
I can't justify that.
We're such sticklers for primary sources. We really, really hate using second, third, fourth, fifth generation sources. We love really to trace it back as far as we can. And if we can't, we sometimes don't include that information because it doesn't feel right. But these are the kind of things we want to have a conversation about, It's also a bit of a throwback. We feel like we've travelled quite far from our roots. When we first started doing the paranormal postcards, this is actually kind of more of the episode we would do. We'd make a few notes and we'd chat about it. It would be more of a discussion. And we'd get to tell you some of the bits about, the actual destination as a tourist experience as well. And I don't feel like we've been doing that recently. And for this location particularly, because obviously you'll know by the title today, we are returning to Mother Shipton's. There was so much stuff about the tourist experience that I wanted to discuss that I feel is really interesting and important. And lastly, the other reason for this episode is that in our Mother Shipton episode, we mentioned that nearly everybody who shared one of their premonition experiences with us also shared a ghost experience of theirs with us at the same time. And we did wonder aloud in the episode whether we should do a special follow-up to hear basically part 2 of those listener stories. And we have decided to do just that today. So without further ado, here is part 2, or rather the second installment, of Sarah's story.
In my mid-20s, I lived in an apartment and had the bad habit of occasionally leaving the front door unlocked when I was at home. The front door opened into the apartment from a long corridor into our front small foyer that was about 6 feet by 6 feet. To the right of the foyer was the main kitchen and living area, and to the left, the bedroom and bathroom. One evening, home alone in the living room, I got up to go to the loo. As I passed through the entry foyer, a movement at the front door caught my eye, causing me to stop in my tracks. I watched in rising panic as the front door, lever-style handle, began to turn down ever so slowly. My eyes flew up to the deadbolt, and I realized with terror that I'd left the deadbolt latch in the upright, unlocked position. I found myself truly paralyzed by fear and unable to move from where I was standing, about 5 feet from the door. Slowly, the handle was turned all the way down, and I knew that the door should now be able to swing open. And yet, it didn't. The door rattled as if someone were trying to open it, but it remained shut as if the deadbolt were locked. But I was looking right at it, and it was unlocked. The gripping fear left me then, and I found I was able to move again. I jumped towards the door and pressed my eye to the peephole, and received an even greater and more baffling shock. Even as the door handle was still rattling, there wasn't a soul in the hallway outside the door. The peephole gives such a wide-angle view, you can see both sides of the corridor and even right down to the doormat. There is no way that someone could have been there, and yet something was trying my door handle. As suddenly as it started, it stopped. In surprise, I quickly looked to the door handle again and watched in shock as right before my eyes, the deadbolt spun to the locked position, slamming home with a loud thunk. In disbelief, I quickly pressed my eye to the peephole again, but the hallway was deserted. I can assure you I was wide awake, entirely sober, and with 20/20 vision. After that experience, I never left the door unlocked again. I wonder now if someone or something purposefully gave me a fright in order to save me from a real intruder. Or perhaps I was seeing a future event that I thwarted by keeping my door locked from then on. Who knows? Jumping forward to our present day and our cosy and completely unhaunted home, since that time we've moved to a small coastal town, and we've been here for the past 10 years. It's fairly remote here, only accessible by ferry, and homes are well spaced out, generally on an acre or more. Our own home, a small West Coast A-frame cabin style, is nestled on the coast amongst the towering rainforest trees. The night here is pitch black, except for the moon and stars, because our little town doesn't have streetlights. Going out after dark means taking a flashlight to find your way home. This could sound a little spooky, especially when the fog rolls in from the ocean, but it's really quite cozy, and I often joke that it's Canada's least haunted home. I've never had any odd experience here until this past year. The first thing that happened was on a perfectly mundane evening when my husband and I were doing some chores around the house. As I mentioned, our home is quite small, with one large room that encompasses our living room, kitchen, dining room and office. On this evening, I was standing facing this room with my back to our bedroom door, where my husband was folding laundry on the bed. I was looking into the living room at my dog Tanner, who was sitting on the carpet. He gazed back at me with an unblinking stare, and his tail slowly began to wag. Behind me, my husband asked me a question, which caused me to turn around to look into the bedroom. There, asleep on the bed beside my husband, was my dog, Tanner. I immediately spun back around, but the Tanner I'd been looking at in the living room had disappeared. Again, I was wide awake and entirely sober. Since that evening, it's happened a couple more times. Seeing him walking across my bed, only to turn around and find him lying on the couch, or seeing him in the house and out in the garden at the same time. It's odd that it's always my dog. There have been a few other odd events, such as sitting in bed in the evening with the bedside lamps on, watching Netflix on my iPad, when a movement in the room will catch my eye. I look up to see a dark shadow in the shape of a person walking from my bedroom door across my bedroom to my side of the bed, or sometimes the opposite direction walking out of the room. In each case, there is no possibility that anything moved in the room, in front of a lamp or out of a window that could have cast a shadow. In each case, it was a human-shaped shadow moving across the room. These events never feel creepy or scary in the least. I just feel as though I've caught a glimpse of a person going about their own business. I never feel frightened. I just think, that was a bit odd, and then go on watching Netflix. It still feels cozy and safe here. I'm never afraid to be here alone or afraid of the dark. Just a few more events to add to the list of things I can't explain.
And thank you so much to Sarah for sharing those experiences with us. Just as interesting as the first installment with her premonitions. And the first thing I've got to say is actually not a paranormal thing. Why don't we have peepholes in our front doors in England? Why don't we have... They would be so useful.
Some do, and I think it's mainly in apartment blocks and things like that, where you don't have like a living room window to look out of to
peep out
check.
of. Yeah.
It's not normal necessarily for an ordinary front door, but everyone I've known that's lived in an apartment or a complex or anything like that, they've all had peepholes.
I want a peephole on my front door.
And we can get one if you really want.
The thing is, you think about the amount of times we've had phantom knocks on our front door.
Yeah.
Or we've had the letterbox go and there's been nobody there. And there's always that doubt in our minds because we have to go round to the window to peer out.
Or open the door.
Or just, well, actually, to be fair, yes, that's true. Sometimes we just
normally
the door
just yank the door open,
yeah.
like, expecting, like, give me parcels. Like, oh, there's nobody
here. But yeah, so watching the doorknob go down like that, quite unsettling. But I think I was on the same level as Sarah, thinking that it was possibly not anything sinister, but a warning.
Yeah. Like,
you know,
keep your door locked.
Make sure, like a reminder, kind of make sure you keep your door, either because something was going to happen or because there was the potential for something to happen. And it didn't come across feeling sinister to me. I
think it would have done if I was there at the time. I think I would have been just like...
Well, that's what I was just going to say, because I have had not an experience quite as dramatic as that, especially with the bolt and everything, but I have had a doorknob rattle like while I've been watching it. And it was very unsettling. It was actually not in a house we lived in. It was in a holiday house. It was when we were staying somewhere on the south coast, I think. And you were there, but I'd gone up to bed before you had. So you were still downstairs watching telly and knew nothing about it. And I was literally just lying in bed and the doorknob just literally just started going up and down and up and down. But it wasn't a lever handle.
Was this an internal door?
Yeah, it was an internal door. So in a way, less scary because it's not going to be an intruder. Because this was an upstairs room, it was an interior door handle, and I knew that you were downstairs, next to the front door, so it wasn't going to be a person. But then what are you left with? It wasn't you, and it was only the two of us in the house. So I have had an experience where I've seen that part of it, at least, not Sarah's full experience, but just the doorknob part. And it's very strange. It's a very strange thing to witness.
See, I'm more familiar with the figures.
Yes.
Seeing the figures walking around. And I've had exactly the same feeling. Like, it's not creepy, it's not scary. It's just comforting. Like I've always said, having Jack around is very much like having a friend with you.
So when you're talking about Jack, we're talking about the name that we've given our one of our resident ghosts, just
Yes.
for anybody tuning in for the first time.
Yeah, if anyone's new, we think he's my great uncle Jack. So yes, we just called him Jack. And whenever you would see his figure walking around the house with his long blue coat on, it just felt like, somebody else is here. I'm not on my own.
Yeah.
I don't need to be afraid. Like somebody's looking out for me. And it was very comforting, except occasionally I will see him indoors. And normally that doesn't spook me, but there's been a couple of times when I've been in the kitchen and I've turned around and there's been right
a person there. Yeah.
And it just, that immediate shock of mostly somebody's there and I didn't hear them walk up behind me.
Yeah, and that would be just as much of a shock if it was me.
Yeah. And I do that to you all the time, because apparently, even though I'm like 5 gazillion stone and look like a truck, I can still walk around the house like a creepy little ninja.
You are a ninja.
But yeah, there's been a couple of times when I've turned around in the kitchen and Jack's been there, or, there's been a figure there, and I'm just like, oh God, Jack, you gave me a fright. And then.
But see, I am not convinced that is that. I think there might be something slightly different going on here, because Sarah is, she's seeing figures, and I can see how that sounds familiar to what we see in our house. But when she's seeing her dog in 2 different places at once,
this
weird. Sounds more like different. A time slip. And I feel like with time slips, you don't get that kind of creepy feeling either. I don't necessarily think you'd find it as spooky, if you know what I mean. Just more confusing than anything.
If it is a time slip, it's often reported that things start to feel a bit weird and sound feels odd and things like that. Yeah. I'm interested to know if any of the times this has happened, you've noticed that sound seems muted or dimmed, or a lot of the time people, I suppose it's different when you're in your own home.
Well, this is what I'm wondering, because I know what you're talking about. And yes, you're right. When we did our time slips episode, that was something that came up quite a lot, was this recognition that before the experience happened, there was a change in the sound quality of the area that they were in. And that's
the
actually
air pressure as well.
Yeah,
a lot of the
exactly.
times people described it as being under a dome.
And we've experienced this on locations we've been to. So it's not just time slips. We experienced this at Framlingham Castle quite recently. We went to. We were walking around the castle grounds and all of a sudden just walked into the foundations of a building that wasn't there anymore and experienced exactly that. The sound quality changed. The air pressure changed. And you're right. A lot of people who've experienced time slips have that kind of happen before the event. So yeah, that is interesting. But is it different when it's in your own house?
Yeah, because it's already going to be fairly muted. A lot of the sounds that would be outside the dome, as it were, would already be outside your house and therefore already muted.
So then, I'm extrapolating and throwing away the skeptic's hat far off into the distance. It's taken by the wind at this point.
I've decided I'm keeping mine in the cupboard till after Christmas. It's a time it's the spooky season.
It is
between October and January. It's time for ghost stories.
Ghost stories for Christmas and all that. Yeah, definitely. The skeptic's hats are gone. So to extrapolate even further, because why not? I'm wondering whether there's something that the house has been built on that just facilitates this kind of mixing of timelines, because it really feels like, she's just seeing things that are happening around her house, but concurrently and from different periods of time, and they're just kind of getting a bit mixed up.
And is she seeing herself walk into and out? Is the shadow her at another time walking into and out of the bedroom?
Precisely what I was thinking. So has the house been built...
Sorry to steal your thunder.
Oh, that's fine. But so has the house been built on... I don't know. I mean, we hear all sorts of posited explanations, theoretical explanations for something like the stone tape theory. And I mean, I know this isn't that, but a lot of people wonder whether time slips are similarly facilitated. Is there courts underground? Is there running water? None of this is in any way scientifically proven, by the way, people, at all. Purely speculation. But after all, we're here to, speculate sometimes, aren't we? That's half the fun.
Well, it's almost time for our next story, but I do have one minor quibble before we move on, because Sarah did mention that she believes she lives in Canada's least haunted house. And I can't quite grasp that that's the case after that story.
After all those stories, it does sound a little bit like when people say, I've never had any experiences, and then go on to tell us amazing experiences, because that's the other one. One type of person we get is I don't believe in, but, which is, totally get that. Just because you've had an experience doesn't mean you have to believe. But the other one is that we quite often, surprisingly often, get people say, I've never had any experiences. And then it's almost like they suddenly remember. And it's the most incredible thing ever.
Yeah, it's like, I've never had anything strange happen to me at all. But
there was this one.
There was this one time when I was sleeping and I was levitated out of the window.
Yeah.
And that doesn't count?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, just to finish off here, is I kind of want to live wherever it is that she lives, because it sounds perfect.
It does sound wonderful.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah,
please take me there right now.
There's not many places in the UK that you can actually see
the stars,
the sky at night without having street lights, at least on the horizon, to dim your views.
We'd have to travel for hours to find somewhere that remote.
So thank you to Sarah for those awesome stories, carrying on from her stories from last episode. And of course, as we said, we've got another story from a listener that was the second part of the story that we shared in last episode. It's part two. And this one is from Kelly.
My next most recent story happened at Shipton Hall in Halifax. The hall was the home of Anne Lister, otherwise known as Gentleman Jack. Her story has been made into a TV series, but I haven't seen this. I only knew her story from the things my daughter had mentioned, so I had no great knowledge of her life. My daughter lives in Halifax, and we decided to have a day out and visit the hall. It's an amazing place, but smaller than I expected. We also went on a day with very few visitors, so we had a lovely quiet walk around the property and grounds. The information given about the house, Anne and her life, is very factual when you read the information in each room. So it's all about where the furniture came from, its dates, why things may have been placed where they are, and that kind of thing. There's very little about Anne's life, other than dates of births and deaths, and why her diaries were written in code. We walked around the ground floor of the property before moving up the single staircase to the bedrooms, and an opportunity to glimpse into the tower Anne had built to house her book collection. We entered the Red Room, which is named this due to the red design that runs around the top of the walls. This room also appears to be the one that holds the most original furniture, including the bed from when Anne lived here. The room had been used by Anne's uncle, and also by Anne and her wife Anne Walker after they were married in York. And although I say married, unfortunately, at the time of the relationship, gay marriage wasn't recognised, so Anne and Anne were not seen as legally married. They chose to take communion together in a York church on Easter Sunday and considered themselves married. We stood in the room for a few minutes, reading the information and looking for the hidden doors, when I started to feel sick, dizzy, and just generally not great. So I told Bex I was going to stand on the landing. I walked out of the room and had some deep breaths and then felt fine. I figured maybe it was dehydration. I had eaten, but I'd drunk a couple of coffees rather than my usual amount of water. I went back in and stood with Bex, but yet again the sick, dizzy feeling came over me, with a feeling that I needed to get out of the room. As I was leaving, Bex said, "Did you feel that?" I asked her what she'd felt. She described it as a whoosh of air. Again, once we were out of the room, I felt fine, and we completed our tour before having lunch. I had a look online when I got home, and apparently this room is known as the Room of Death and Despair. Not only where James Lister was found dead at the foot of the bed, but significantly where Anne's wife, Anne Walker, locked herself in after Anne Lister passed away abroad from a fever. Despite her wife being left the house in Anne Lister's will, it appears she had a breakdown in the room because the family wanted her to leave due to the marriage not being legal. So she locked herself in until they had to get a workman to take the door off its hinges to get to her, before she was admitted to a York asylum and then passed away in 1854. There are stories that when they got into the room it was clear that she hadn't been caring for herself, and even that they found blood. So despite the fact that her and Anne had shared many happy times together, I can only think that maybe we were picking up on the unhappiness she felt when she remained in this room after Anne Lister's death.
And thank you to Kelly for sharing this story and the previous story on last episode. It was a very interesting one with the, what was it called? The Room of Death and Despair.
Room of Death and Despair as well. And I think the fact that it is called the Red Room is just a coincidence because it makes it sound even more dramatic, doesn't it? The Red Room. It sounds like something from a Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, it was the Room of Death and Despair. Sounds like something from Labyrinth.
It does, but I think...
we don't go that way. That way's the Room of Death and Despair.
But I think the fact that it's called the Red Room is... a lot of these stately homes are called the Blue Room and the Green Room and the Red Room. And I think it's just coincidence.
We've been to lots of places with a pink room or a blue room. Yeah, it's very... common. I was going to say common. It's not common. No. Giant mansions.
Well known, I suppose, is a better word.
It occurs frequently in posh people's houses.
It does. But Shipton Hall, I'd never heard of Shipton Hall. I'd not heard of Shipton Hall. I'd not heard of Anne Lister. So I really have to thank Kelly for sending in this story, because after having looked into it a little bit, and I mean, we haven't done our proper normal deep dive, but just from what I found out, I feel like I've been missing out on this huge chunk of history.
Yeah,
that's actually quite important.
Heard of it. I'd heard of Gentleman Jack. I'd heard of Shipton Hall, but that's about as far as it goes. I don't know much deeper than that. It's one of those things that I obviously tucked away in the back of my brain. Oh, you should look into that one day, and never did. I
hadn't even heard that much. So because I did do a mini dive into it just for my own curiosity, because I'd never heard of it, I thought I'd share some of that with you guys today. So Shipton Hall is listed as a 15th century hall, but it's probably had occupation there as early as the 14th century, and it's a really cool looking building. As Kelly said, it's not a huge mansion, and I mean, it's difficult. We haven't been there ourselves, so I'm only looking at pictures, but it's got this cool sort of Tudor looking frontage with, you know, like the whitewashed walls and the black oak timbers, what they call like a half timbered house. But then behind that front, you've got almost towery bits going on, and like turns into like a little mini castle at the rear. I think we're going to have to try and get up there and have an explore at some point, because it looks really cool.
I'm going to be really boring here.
Go on.
The paint that I use to paint the studio is actually the type of paint they use to blacken the timbers on Tudor houses.
Is it really? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's actually really cool. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I'm quite proud of that. But yeah, it kind of, it's got some kind of crenellated bits and towery bits going on. So it's a bit of a mishmash, because you've got this Tudor front and some kind of crenellated bits in the back. It's one of those odd buildings that it's almost got a bit of an identity crisis going on.
Is it one of those where they've just added to it over the years in the style
possibly
that's been there at the time?
Yeah, like I mean, when they're talking
Tudor house, I'd like a tower, please.
Yeah, when they're talking about, you know, it's got roots in the 14th century, but the bits we can see is mostly 15th century. I'm guessing it's kind of grown up a bit higgledy-piggledy, which, you know, we love, don't we? But apparently it might have been the inspiration for Thrushcross. I can't say this word. Thrushcross Grange. Oh my goodness. Words. Thrushcross Grange from Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. So that was quite interesting.
I've never read that either.
No. Oh, well, we'll have to get you caught up. But Anne Lister inherited that estate in 1826. And the reason, well, one of the reasons she's very famous is for her diaries, which, again, I cannot believe I had never heard of these diaries, because they're really important. They're this hugely important, like, primary historical source of information, and I'd never heard of them. So she wrote volumes and volumes of diaries during her life that amounted to 5 million words in total. And a lot of them were written in a self-developed code or shorthand that Anne herself called crypt hand. And this was to keep details of her private life, well, private, really, especially some of the more steamy sections of the diaries concerning her love life. And in fact, when they were hidden behind a panel at Shipton Hall and decrypted some 40 to 50 years after her death, the last inhabitant of Shipton Hall, John Lister, I wonder if that's who died in the bedroom,
okay,
was advised to burn them due to the content being so contentious for the time. Thankfully, though, he didn't, and today they're considered a very important primary source, as I said, for 19th century local, social, political and gender history. Yeah, so that's just got me thinking, actually, because I didn't actually include this in my notes. And again, it's one of these things that I couldn't really chase down to anything. But I read somewhere in my searchings that John Lister, after he deciphered the diaries, he was actually sleeping in the Red Room, like he was staying in the room that Anne and her wife Anne used to sleep in. And he mentioned being worried that he was going to be haunted because of what he'd discovered.
Okay.
Almost like he was worried that their ghosts were going to come back and haunt him because he'd kind of uncovered their private life, their secrets, And I'm going to have to go back and have a look more into that reference now, because I hadn't kind of put all the pieces together. But reading this now, I just think that's a bit of a mind twister, because you've got this guy who's uncovered their secrets and he's worried about being haunted in that room, but then he died in that room himself, and we're now wondering if whatever's haunting that room is actually John himself.
Oh, that's weird. Although I think I'm not sure what I'd have done in his position, because he deciphered them, didn't he?
He and one other person.
I think if it was two of us, I'd have left the steamy bits to the other person, because that's your relative and you knew them.
Yeah.
I think I'd have been a bit George Takei and, oh my, you'd better do this bit.
Yeah. Well, sadly, as Kelly mentioned, Anne Lister died from a fever while she was travelling in 1840. But she did make sure her wife, Anne, it's very confusing having these two Annes, I apologise, had a lifetime interest in the Shipton estate, so she could carry on living there, and she continued to stay in the Red Room that the couple had once shared. And it does sound, from Anne Lister's diaries and from other contemporaries, that the pair shared some very happy times together. But, so this is where it gets interesting, because obviously Kelly has mentioned that she had this kind of well, for one thing, the room's called the Room of Death and Despair. Mm-hmm. That would imply to me that other people have also felt this kind of oppressive atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Kelly felt sick and dizzy and off and just like there was something wrong. And I'm wondering if other people have felt that, So, although the pair had very happy times together, Anne Walker herself suffered very badly from anxiety and depression throughout her whole life. So yes, we've got this situation where obviously she's staying in the room after her wife died and she's suffering from all that grief. But actually, she suffered from a lot of grief all through her life. Mm-hmm. It's really quite sad. Anne Walker, by the time she was 19, she'd lost her brother, her sister, her mother, her father. And then a few years later, her older brother died. Ugh. And their wife, their wife died or their baby died? They were just she lost so many family members at such a young age. It's no wonder that she suffered from anxiety and depression, quite frankly. So you haven't only got the grief of Anne's death, you've got the grief that she was carrying with her for a large part of her life while she was living in the Red Room, which is, is really sad. I haven't dedicated really enough time to properly look into the stories about her leaving Shipton Hall and entering a mental asylum. But from what I did find, it sounded like a lot of the stories may have been rather embellished and kind of over-dramatised a little bit.
As a sort of, this is what will happen if you have a unnatural relationship.
Possibly, possibly Victorianised. Yeah, I would imagine that's part of it. It's the Victorians loved to make a moral example out of everything, didn't they? And to be honest, I don't think it was anywhere near as bad as they were making it out to be at all. She didn't die in a mental asylum. She was only in there for about 7 or 8 months, and then she left. And she lived with family, and she lived to the age of 51 and eventually died from what was probably a stroke, but not in the asylum. And as for the story about people breaking into the Red Room and finding all sorts of evidence about her poor mental state and lack of self-care, I mean, I suppose it, by Victorian standards, maybe, but I found...
Not by modern standards, from the sounds of things.
No, well, I found an account from a contemporary who was there when they opened the Red Room. God knows what they think
if they could see the studio right now, my word.
Well, wait till you hear the description. So this was transcribed by the West Yorkshire Archive Service, and it describes the scene of the Red Room as they found it. And Anne wasn't actually there. She'd left under her own steam to go somewhere else visiting. So they didn't break in and find her. They broke in because she wasn't there and they wanted to get something out of the room, from what it sounds like. So the description, as transcribed, goes like this. After hearing all the particulars of Miss Walker's departure from Shipton Hall, Mrs. Sutherland and the captain, in order to obtain requisite wearing apparel, proceeded to Miss Walker's Red Room, which they found locked, and not finding any key that would open the door, they directed Jennings the constable to open it, which he did by taking it off the hinges. The room was in a most filthy condition, and at the side of the bed were a brace of loaded pistols, a pile of lucifer matches. The bedclothes were turned down a little on one side, and had the appearance of a person having thrown herself down, marks in the sheet as though she had laid down in her shoes. I know. There were no nail or toothbrush. Heavens! The shutters were closed. Oh my goodness. If people could see our house now. An old dirty candlestick was covered with tallow as if the candle had melted away in it. The furniture in the room might not have been dusted for months. The room adjoining Miss Walker's Red Room was as dirty as her Red Room. Papers were strewn about in complete confusion. In the Red Room there were many handkerchiefs spotted all over with blood. So, apart from the tuberculosis hanky and the brace of pistols, they honestly could be describing our house. And I mean, like I said, we've got to remember that this is a very different time and standards were very different.
Oh, yeah.
But there's nothing really in there that sounds to me like she was taking awful, awful care of herself and was in a terrible mental state.
No, this seems to me to be someone that doesn't give a monkeys about societal standards.
Yeah, that was my thinking.
You know,
and rightly so.
Yeah, it's not like they walked in and there was rotting food all over the place. You know, it hadn't been dusted in a little while and the sheet wasn't turned down properly.
That was the bit that got me. The bedclothes were turned down a little on one side.
Oh, shock horror.
Shock horror. Oh, my goodness. Honestly, if those people came in here now, they'd be carting us both off to the asylum from one look at our living room. So it doesn't sound that shocking to me. I feel, as you said, it's probably a case of Victorians trying to push moral values. Although, of course, I can understand that there was a bit of a shock value from the bloody hanky, but I found one account when I was looking that mentioned that about this time, Anne Walker's only remaining sibling was actually suffering from tuberculosis. So, of course, that's going to lead us all to wonder, you know, if she was close to that sister, was she suffering from tuberculosis too? Now, that doesn't appear to be what she died from. It seems that she died from a stroke.
Or did they come and stay at the hall, maybe?
Well, I don't know. I just don't know enough about it. She did live for Anne Walker lived for another 11 years after this. But I did a quick look and apparently that's not unheard of with a tuberculosis diagnosis, 10 years. So who knows? It could just have been a case of she was actually really ill. But either way, I feel like in that room and with all the grief that Anne Walker suffered from during her life, and then with the Anne Lister's descendant actually dying in there, there's so much opportunity there for any number or a combination of those things to create this kind of oppressive atmosphere. And also, even without those things, you've got this legend that has arisen around the room and about Anne Walker's mental health, as misplaced as that may have been, and we will never know because we can't be there. The legend itself will have some power, I feel. We've seen this in other places, like at the Ferryboat Inn, where the legend has almost created its own ghost.
Yeah, and when we've spoken to Greg and Dana Newkirk about like ghost machines and creating ghosts, like the fact that people call it the room of death and despair.
Exactly.
You know, just before you go in, you're taking that in with you. Like anyone that visits is taking that in with you.
Yeah, and is that creating the atmosphere all on its own? You know, I think that's another possibility that we have to consider. But that is not the only haunting at Shipton Hall. And we hear from a hall attendant who spoke to the BBC a few years ago, who has 26 years of service at the historic building. And he told them that he'd grown accustomed to seeing odd things out of the corner of his eyes and hearing unexplained creaks and groans. He said they didn't bother him much during the day, but the building had a completely different atmosphere at night. But he said the strangest thing he'd experienced at Shipton Hall occurred early one morning when he was opening a side gate and became aware of a large black shape just above and to the left of his head. He described it as being almost like a big black cloak and said that it was quite frightening.
And there have been reports from other staff as well, and they've experienced phantom smells of lavender and pipe tobacco. And a former curator once saw the apparition of a cat walk straight through a wall. The Facebook page Cruel Calderdale, which shares dark, weird and amusing historical stories from the area around Halifax and Shipton Hall, shared another story from a person that used to work there. Just like the attendant story, it happened early in the morning as they were opening up for the day, and they were completely alone. But as they were going about their duties, they started to hear noises from the empty room directly above them. They heard heavy footsteps, pacing, walking quickly back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. And you won't be surprised to hear that the room directly above them just happened to be the Red Room.
The room of death and despair.
The room of death
I love
and
it.
despair.
I think we're going to have to go there now. If we're up in Yorkshire again, I think we might have to try and pop in, because I really want to go up there now and see if we get a vibe from the room. That's really interesting. I love stories like this. And if any of our other listeners have been to locations that we may not have heard of, especially if you've got a weird vibe in a room, do let us know, because I'd love to add them to our paranormal bucket list and see if we go and get any vibes. I love visiting places like that and just seeing what we can pick up on.
Yep, definitely. Really excited to hear about it.
So thank you once again to Kelly for sharing that experience with us and the experience she shared with us in the last episode. And before we move on and return to Mother Shipton's, we have just one more story for you. And it's another second installment to one of the stories that we shared last episode, and this is from B. And we get a little treat because B has recorded this experience herself, so we get to sit and listen in with you guys. And we pick up the story exactly where we left off in the last episode. In that experience, we heard that B's parents had delayed moving house because of some strange and maybe premonition-related activity. This story picks up when they move into their new house. But that wasn't the end to their strange experiences.
The second one is the house that they ended up buying. We moved into when I was about 4. Now, to know this house, you need to know the layout of the house, to know this story even. So you would walk straight into an open plan sort of living room. Immediately ahead of the door, there were stairs up to a little landing where there were 2 bedrooms and some more stairs that went further up. And then sort of where you were standing from the front door to the left of you, there were some stairs down that would go to the dining room and the kitchen. And we moved into it. It was a new build. We were the first people in it. And so were the people next door. It was a brand new estate. And I made friends with a little girl next door. And my mum and dad were kind of good friends with their parents as well. One day I was playing at the little girl's house next door. And my mum came round to get me, say it was tea time, etc. She says she walked in and she saw what she thought was my friend walk across the landing, up those little stairs, immediately opposite the front door. but wearing her nightie still. It was tea time. So my mum was like, oh, okay. I don't know what's going on. Chatting away to my neighbour's mum. And then my neighbour's mum said, right, I'll call the girls. She called our names. And then we ran up from the downstairs bit to my mum, the bit where the dining room had been and the kitchen. I think we'd been drawing or something. My mum's jaw dropped. And she kind of ushered me out quite quickly and was kind of recounting to my dad that night what she'd seen, which was somebody basically in an old-fashioned nightie, little girl, across the landing right in front of her. And then she thought it was us and we ran up from the downstairs area. So that was the first thing. She told our neighbours about this. She told my friend's mum. I don't know what happened. I'm kind of quite foggy on all these details because all this happened I was told all these stories a long time ago, but they've stuck with me because I'm interested in spirit now as a result of them. And then I don't know how much time elapsed, but one day our neighbour knocked on our door, and asked my mum to go round. She had her brother staying with her. And she went in and she kind of said to my mum, can you please explain what you saw a few weeks ago? And the brother was looking kind of shaky. My mum explained what she'd seen. And the brother said he had just seen exactly the same thing. So that was that. Not long after, my neighbours moved out. I don't know if there's any more activity there. My mum's quite sensitive and she's a big believer in the supernatural. She had a few more stories from that house. After my neighbours, I never noticed anything. I was a kid, I would feel very, very, very scared. There was like a really dark ginnel. So naturally it's scary, really, that would go down from our front door to the back garden. I was very, very scared, always, of that ginnel, day or night. I got a horrible feeling in it. I look back now and I think, well, yeah, I think I did feel like there was something ominous there. And it was so bad that we had a guinea pig in the back garden. And in the winter, I refused to go out and feed the poor thing. So my mum and dad have to do it. But, I still feel guilty because it was cold. And, I would not go out and feed the guinea pig much as I loved it. I would not go down that ginnel or even out the back door, which was closer. Just all around there, it felt ominous. Other things my mum experienced, she said one day she was washing up, looking out the kitchen window, which overlooked, obviously, the back garden. And she saw a group of children playing in our garden, all old-fashioned dress. And she said they seemed to notice her. It went on for, I think she said about half a minute. She was staring at them, and then she just kind of blinked, and they were gone. Very, very spooky for her. And I think she was getting quite unsettled by just the general feeling in the house. Always a cold spot where she used to sit at night, freezing cold spot. So the time came when I was about 13, we decided to move on. And night before we left, the very last night before we left, my mum was saying to me, there was like a conservatory down at the bottom of the dining room. And she was like, can you stop, opening the conservatory door and moving all the boxes onto the floor? Because she put them all on chairs in there and stuff. She's like, I know where everything is. We're moving tomorrow. Stop moving them. I was like, I'm not doing anything. I don't want to go in the conservatory. It's cold. I don't want to. She didn't believe me. And then that night, we were all kind of sitting together, having a chat about it being the last night in our house. It was me, my mum, my dad. And then suddenly there was this almighty crash from downstairs where the conservatory was. We kind of all ran down. The conservatory door had been flung open and there were bags and boxes all over the floor. So that was our last night there. So kind of spooky growing up in that house.
And thank you to B for sharing another one of her stories with us. I must admit, it's lovely to just sit and listen to a ghost story as we're recording the show. It's really great. Gets us in the vibe.
Yep.
And don't fear, because B has even more stories to share.
Yep, that's not even the end of them. She's had quite a lot of experiences, so just keep an ear out for those in future episodes. They will be coming up. There
are some corkers in there as well. So, yeah, there will be more. But that's not to say there weren't any corkers in this one, because, whoa, there was some really interesting stuff going on there. And the first thing I want to say that was so interesting to me was that she quite explicitly says this is a new build house. Mm-hmm. That is so interesting to me. And it happens more often than you'd think.
I mean, your childhood home, Fitz, that was a new build, wasn't it?
Well, it had one prior owner before us. It was built in like 79 or 80 or something.
But they didn't die there, did they?
No. They moved out. We moved in 87 or something. Mm-hmm. So it was only, it was under 10 years old.
Exactly. Well, I class that as a new build. So no reason for there to be any ghosts there. And you would think in this house being a new build, the ghost that her mum saw, this kind of girl in a nightie, that immediately speaks of like a Victorian little girl ghost, doesn't it? Because you think of the white nightie kind of thing. It just... Yeah,
possibly even as late as sort of the 50s or 60s.
Well, that's just what I was going to say, actually. Although I'm sitting here saying the first thing it brings to mind is a little girl ghost, a Victorian little girl ghost. That's, it's a movie trope, isn't it? That's where we all get that idea from. Of course, white, even sort of frilly long nighties have been used. It's the cloak thing all over again. You see a cloak, everybody thinks monk. You see a white nightie, you think Victorians. And of course, white nighties have been around for centuries and really only fell out of fashion in maybe the 60s and 70s, possibly even, maybe a bit earlier, but...
Yeah, I'm going back to films and tropes. It tends to be like people in the sort of late 70s, early 80s in films, and they'll see their mum wearing like the long white nightie, and it's like, oh, how traditional. And they're then wearing like snazzy lycra pants or something. I don't know. Don't ask me about fashion. I haven't a clue.
Lycra pants.
I don't know. The stretchy stuff.
Jersey, darling.
Whatever. Newer things than it would appear.
Yeah, so it's the it's the hooded monk kind of situation I think we've got going on there. But even so, with a new build house, why is there any ghost there? And especially seeing a group of children in the garden makes a bit more sense.
Yeah,
because obviously then we're thinking, is the house built on something? What was the house built on?
Or it could have just been like a field at the edge of the village or something that the kids played in. Like that wouldn't necessarily be unusual. The nightie in the house was the weirdest bit for me.
Because then that apparition, if it was an apparition, they are interacting with the structure of the house that's there now. Unless, of course, the house was built over the top of an existing house and it, happened to follow a kind of floor plan. I don't know. But really interesting. And then we've got this ominous kind of oppressive feeling ginnel. And for people in different parts of Britain or overseas, if you don't know what a ginnel is, it's like a
little alleyway.
It's a colloquial. We have colloquial names for them over here. In Northamptonshire, we call them jitties. I'm not sure what other counties call them, but it's one of those things that for some reason every county has their own name for. I
was entirely unaware of jitties. I obviously went to too posh a school to refer to them as jitties.
Yeah, I knew them as jitties. So yeah, it means like a very narrow little alleyway, basically. Which again, almost makes me wonder more if there was a building there before. Because why would it only be that one narrow little stretch? I can understand seeing the children in the garden, like you said, maybe it was somewhere that they just hung out or somewhere at the edge of the village. But to have just a little ginnel, like a small enclosed space like that particularly felt a bit off.
Well, I got the impression it was like we have here between the houses, an alleyway that runs from the front to the back so you can get to your back garden.
Yeah. But if that was a new build and there was nothing there before, why would that particular stretch feel so off? That's what I can't quite wrap my head around, if you know what I mean. If there was nothing there before and it was just open space, then why would you end up with kind of a weird vibe in that alleyway?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes just like a close, dark space can feel a bit spooky.
And then you've got the other side to that where you find so often in old and new houses, doesn't seem to matter, that you find that places like stairs and attics and out-of-the-way passages, places that are not frequented very often, places that people pass through and don't stay, end up feeling creepy. And well, not just feel creepy, they are the places that people see apparitions, particularly places like stairways and corridors. We hear that so often. I mean, And that's new hauntings and historical hauntings. We have that in our house.
Yep.
We've got a creepy
we had
staircase.
That in our old house.
We had that in our old house. People would see apparitions on the stairs as opposed to any of the other rooms.
Yeah, I saw my mum's legs coming down the stairs at her house once.
Yeah,
that was
weird.
Was
very strange.
Just the legs, if anyone's listening. It wasn't the whole of my mother. It was like, I think, ankle to knee. It was just weird.
And then you saw that big, weird, dark apparition at the top of our stairs when we were doing an experiment, a paranormal experiment one night.
Oh, yeah, that was terrifying.
Yeah, you were really understandably really scared.
Like,
so,
for those of you listening, like, yeah, it wasn't just that there was this figure at the top of the stairs. It was the fact that it seemed to start from nothing and just like pull itself up out of the carpet and then became like 8 feet tall.
Yeah. It's very creepy. So I have always wondered whether there is something about these spaces like corridors and stairwells and, landings and attics and, again, places that people don't linger. Is it, do they have something about them that collects energy because people are passing through in and out of them all the time? Or is it because they're not very frequented, that people don't hang out in those spaces? So if there is a spirit around, is it more comfortable for them to be there out of the way? I don't know.
I was wondering whether it was almost the opposite, in that because you're not in there very often, you're not sort of relaxing in it and imbuing it with that sort of calm, homely, I live here feeling.
Yeah, you're not imprinting your own energy over the top of it. I see what you mean. Yeah, it could be. So some really interesting things to just kind of dive into in those stories. B, thank you so much for sharing them.
I've got more. I've got more.
Sorry.
Like the one thing I was really interested in as well was at the very end when she was talking about they were getting ready to move.
Yeah.
And her mother was like, stop mucking about with the boxes. We're moving tomorrow. I've got everything packed, and the door opening. And then when they were sat around just getting ready to go to sleep for the next day for moving, and then the big boom and all the boxes knocked over.
Yeah.
And my first thought was that ghost doesn't want you to leave.
I must admit, that was my first thought as well. I had forgotten about that until you mentioned it. But yeah, when I heard B read that felt to me like, I don't want you to go. Like, and you often find that ghosts don't like change. They don't like it when people go. They don't like it when people change the furniture around. They don't like when new people move in, and you can understand why.
So yeah, I wonder what the people that bought the house walked into when they moved in, and whether it settled down after a little while.
And you just reminded me of something else, the fact that their neighbours that had where they saw the house in which they saw the little girl, and the brother saw it as well.
Yeah, and then they moved out. Yeah.
And it does beg the question, was it something to do with the haunting?
Was it too spooky?
Possibly. Well, thank you again to B for sharing that with us, and we can't wait to share the next instalments of the rest of your stories in a future episode.
And if any of you lovely listeners out there have any stories that you'd be happy to share, please do get in touch through our website at knockOnceVS.com, as we are in desperate need of new spooky stories. But now it's time to return to Yorkshire and Knaresborough and settle in for a good old chinwag about the bits we didn't get to tell you about our visit to Mother Shipton's cave.
Yes, and just a quick note before we start, to our lovely patrons, we did film the visit, and we're sorry we're so behind with our videos. We've spent most of the year struggling with camera issues and trying and, well, failing, to be honest, to make decent footage with what is essentially a potato. But we finally got new phones with swanky, lovely cameras that actually work just in time for our trips to Sutton Hoo, Rendlesham and Knaresborough. So you will be seeing some footage from those visits very soon.
Yes, they are indeed underway, and the Knaresborough video should hopefully be out in the next few days.
Yep, fingers crossed. So the first thing we wanted to speak about really was, as we mentioned earlier, when we originally started doing the paranormal postcards, we used to talk a bit about the tourist experience a bit more. We'd talk about what it was like to actually go and maybe go to the cafe, or what the parking was like and how it felt. And we don't really do that anymore. And to be fair, this particular location really lent itself to us wanting to talk about that aspect of it, because it was such a lovely day out. And that's not to say that our other trips aren't lovely days out. We always have a wonderful time. But this was just a treat. It was an absolute treat for us. First of all, you know, the Yorkshire landscape was absolutely gorgeous. We just don't have... I love our local landscape, but it's very flat. It's quite featureless. And to go to this beautiful river valley, I mean, the car park for Mother Shipton's is beautiful in itself.
Yes, possibly the most beautiful car park in the world.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about the world, but certainly possibly the most beautiful car park that we've ever parked in. It's absolutely gorgeous. You come.
They should have that on a sign.
The most gorgeous car park
we've ever parked in, Lillinfitz.
You kind of come past the Mother Shipton gatehouse, which is one of those checkerboard houses we were talking about in the episode, which is really cool. And then you park up right next to the river.
I've got to interject because the guy on the gate was really nice.
He was.
Like, we turned
he was
up,
lovely.
We pulled in, and there's quite a narrow car entrance. And
it was really narrow, actually.
Yeah, I think the Coffeemobile would have fit through.
I wouldn't have wanted to drive it through, though. It would have been one of those things where you're holding your breath and trying to squeeze the sides in.
But yeah, he came like smiling and waving out and said, here's all your information, and just wait right there. I'll open up the side gate for you so we can get you in. And
he had to open the big gate.
He had to open the big gate so we could get the Coffeemobile in. But yeah, he was just so lovely.
He was really, really cool, and gave us all our brochures, because you can book all your brochures and everything online first when you buy your tickets, which was really handy because the gift shop and the museum is actually completely at the other end of the attraction. So I think you can buy that stuff from the gift shop, but I don't know whether you'd have to walk all the way like through the length of the long walk to get it and then come back to have that information when you see the dropping well and everything.
Yeah.
So it makes more sense, I think, to get it online. And then as you go through the gate, you're just given the guidebook and the book of prophecies as well we got, which was really interesting. So we actually spent quite a lot of time just looking at the view once we'd parked up, because we were right in front of the river. You got all these rowing boats dotting this beautiful scene. You got
amazing aqueduct.
Yes.
You've got all the houses up on the hill.
Not an aqueduct, it's a viaduct.
Viaduct, sorry.
Because aqueduct is the one water goes over and viaduct is the one trains go over, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But this is a railway line.
Maybe I was just getting confused because part of the story in the last episode was the wooden pipes for an...
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
One of the prophecies involved an aqueduct, didn't it? No, I'm pretty sure this is a viaduct. But yeah, they've crenellated it.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
It does. It shouldn't. And apparently, when they put it up, I think it was in the Victorian era, people really slated it. They didn't like it at all. They thought it was really, really tacky.
Oh.
So the contemporaries of the time didn't like that design. I think... because you've got the castle, like the ruins of Knaresborough Castle.
Oh, yeah, of course. You've got the castle literally overlooking.
Yeah.
Oh, it's something to see. It really is.
And I think that's why they crenellated the viaduct, to try and blend it in with the landscape of the castle. And if you look closely at the viaduct, they've actually made the pillars look like little castle towers. If you look at the detail, there's like little arrow slits and stuff sort of carved into it.
I hadn't even noticed that.
It's really fascinating. But yeah, apparently everybody, when it was built, thought it was tacky. So, but I think it's gorgeous.
Can't please everyone.
No. I mean, it's a real shame we didn't get a chance to cross the river, because we were on one side of the river and on the other side there was like rowing boat hire and a cafe. And I think from that cafe you can get a haunted Knaresborough, like a map. What am I trying to, not a puzzle map, like a
treasure map.
Yeah, like a treasure trail map.
Like the one we did in, where was it where we went?
Yeah, oh my goodness, I can't remember. But we did one for an episode, didn't we? Yeah. We did a treasure trail map. And it's like that. So you can pick up a haunted Knaresborough treasure trail map and go and check out all the haunted spots. And there's even like an audio download, so that you can download it before you go. And as you're walking around, you can hear all the little ghost stories and, bits of history and stuff like that. It's very cool. So I wish we'd had more time there. And
we were hoping to visit the castle as well.
I was hoping to take out a rowing boat. Fitz wasn't as convinced. To be fair, it was quite cold and it must have been freezing on the water. But there were a few hardy people out there. Yeah, I would have loved to have gone to visit the castle and take a rowing boat out. So I definitely want to go back.
Yeah.
So all this is before you even get to the attraction. And then as you walk up through the Long Walk, if you've listened to the episode, you'll have heard us talk about Henry Slingsby? There were so many Slingsbys, the local landed gentry family that were involved in the area. And I think it was Henry Slingsby who planted the Long Walk. And basically, it was a little leftover bit of a royal hunting forest. So you're walking through gorgeous woodland, these immense ancient beech trees that are hundreds of years old. And as you're walking through, you've got all these like little snippets about Mother Shipton. And a lot of them are on signs that are shaped like old books.
Mm-hmm.
Not like books. It's not just books. It's like big magic spell book type things. Tomes. Yes. It's very cool. And I know it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but then you go up into this gorgeous picnic area and it's really well done up for people like us who prefer to do everything outside. Like, we will do everything outside if we possibly can. And it's got this lovely picnic area with benches, but also with these little like booths that you can shelter from the elements in.
Yeah, they've got sort of open-sided huts.
Yeah.
So if it's raining, you can still sit outside and have your sandwiches and a cup of coffee without getting wet.
And also when it's hot and sunny, they'd be brilliant in hot weather when you've got a bit of shade overhead.
Yeah.
But they look like little elf huts. They're really cool.
They were fantastic. And they had these, like, for the sort of Halloween display, they had these, like, witches' houses, which were awesome. I wanted to take one home and have it as a shed.
I did.
It's like a giant wooden shed, but sort of crookedy with windows.
Yeah.
And like your stereotypical gingerbread house.
Yes. Yeah, like a gingerbread house.
I was like, I want that for my garden.
I know, I did too. And they had, they were all decorated with pumpkins. There were pumpkins everywhere, and witches' brooms and cauldrons and skeletons.
Yeah, the skeletons were great.
They were cool. They were all posing and being silly. And in the middle, they had these huge, like carved wooden mushrooms and this amazing horse sculpture.
Yeah, my favourite bit there was the sculptures, because they'd obviously spent so much time and effort making these things, and they were incredible. The horse, like you say, was the best one, I think.
Yeah.
It really caught that sort of sense of movement and flowing
Yeah,
manes.
it did actually. That's a good point. No, it was really good. So I'm excited for the patrons to see some video of that, because that was definitely one of the highlights of that area, I think. So it turns out that they do a seasonal display, I think like 4 times a year. They have like a spring one and a summer one, and obviously the autumn one is the Halloween display. And that was just such a treat for us, because we're usually so busy around Halloween. It's kind of the busiest time of year for us for our day jobs, and obviously for the podcast is a really busy time. And we just always end up missing all the Halloween fun. No, and to be fair, the other side of that is in England, we don't do a very good job on Halloween. It's getting bigger, but it's still not a big thing. There's not a lot of attractions you can go to that are Halloween themed and you have those kind of decorations. We just don't really have it here.
Even the sort of trick-or-treating is fairly perfunctory. And
it's a bit tame, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very, like, we've had, well, the last 2 or 3 years, we haven't had anybody knock the door. Before that, I think it was just the next door neighbours.
Yeah. Nobody decorates their houses or anything. You might get
apart from us.
But I mean,
then our house is always Halloween-y.
Yeah. But outside, you don't see any decorations. You don't see any lights or anything like that, do you?
Giant skeletons. I want one of those giant skeletons.
Yeah. You might get the odd sort of limp-looking pumpkin on somebody's doorstep, and that's about it. So to go somewhere and just find this treasure trove of, Halloween decorations and pumpkins everywhere, it was really lovely for us to feel like we were having a Halloween day out. And I can imagine at Christmas, like for children especially, it must be amazing. They probably turn it into this wonderful Christmas grotto. If their standards for Halloween are anything to go by, I bet it looks beautiful at Christmas. Oh, and the other thing that's worth mentioning that they had in that picnic area was like a little snack hut. So again, there were all these little wooden huts around, and one of them was actually selling sort of like coffee and crisps and ice cream and possibly sandwiches, little bits to eat, which was really handy.
do be warned that they turn off the coffee machine exactly on time.
Yeah, as we found out to our dismay as we were leaving.
We're just like, well, just grab a coffee for the journey home.
For the road.
And they're like, we've turned the coffee machine off. We'll make you an instant if you want, which was very sweet of them.
Well, yeah, it was, because they didn't charge us for it. But if you want a proper coffee, don't leave it to the last minute like we did. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about that they had in this woodland kind of picnic area was coin trees. And I just find this legend, well, I suppose not legend, folklore maybe, really, really fascinating. I'm not sure whether having coin trees is something that has always happened on the site, because the signage there only kind of delved a tiny little bit into the general legend or, folklore of coin trees, or whether it may be something more recent that they've introduced because it's kind of, it fits in with the wishing well theme.
And if you've never heard of a coin tree, it's literally just coins hammered into a tree.
Yeah, and I mean, these weren't living trees on the site. These were felled trees, so either they'd fallen or they'd been cut down. So they were, I guess, logs, really. Although they're called coin trees, most of them today are actually felled logs. And here they even had like a little metal hammer on a chain, so you could tap your own coin in. And the general idea is like, it's a bit like a wishing well. Well, we'll get into it a bit more because the legends and the folklore behind it vary. And like all great folklore, it kind of changes with the regions and the people and the time. But at Mother Shipton's, I think the idea was that you hammer a coin in for a wish, essentially.
Yeah. So I looked into this a little bit more because I didn't know much about coin trees, and I came across the Coin Tree Motherlode.
You did.
It was a...
Did you ever actually finish reading it all the way to the end?
No.
It was
well,
like thousands of pages.
For two reasons. I found this dissertation. It was called Coining the Coin Tree, Contextualising a Contemporary British Custom.
Oh, we love a good dissertation.
Kerry Holbrook. And it was like 1,000 pages long.
Yep.
And it's not the easiest read because it's an academic paper, but also I think I broke their website looking at it so many times because I kept trying to go back to reference other things and it's like error, and it just wouldn't let me load it again.
Oh no, Kerry Holbrook, I'm so sorry, we broke your dissertation.
Indeed. So I got quite a lot of information, which was really fascinating, but there must have been, I read a good 100, 200 pages.
Yeah.
There's at least another sort of 800 to go. So that's quite a lot.
Well, if anybody's interested in looking much more in depth into coin trees, we will obviously link Kerry Holbrook's dissertation below, and hopefully it won't be broken anymore by the time you go to look at it.
Let's hope so. So, it seems like it's a very, very old custom. Like whenever people talk about it, it seems like one of those things that's always come from, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But when people have actually investigated this, it seems like the coins in the trees generally only go back as far as the 1960s or 70s. So that kind of puts a date range on a lot of them. But we have older references than that. So we know that it was happening before then. So I'm not sure what's happened to those older coins or the older trees.
Yeah. I wonder if they've just rotted away.
Possibly. I'm not sure. As we'll find out.
Some of them have.
Yeah, some of them have, and it's been an issue in the past. Possibly the most famous one was Isle Marie in Scotland, and apologies to anyone in Scotland if I pronounced that incorrectly. And it's very famous because Queen Victoria visited there in 1877. And this isle is a small island in Loch Marie. Again, apologies, I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it was a sacred and mysterious spot for a long, long time. There's records of rituals taking place there for at least 200 years before then, due to a healing well that was on the site.
See, now it's making sense.
Yeah.
With Mother Shipton's being a healing well. So even if that coin tree tradition hadn't grown up organically at Mother Shipton's, that would make sense to me why they've put one there now.
Yeah, it very much seems that coin trees or clootie trees. which are slightly different.
Yeah, Clootie trees you've probably heard us mention before because when we visited the Rollright stones in Oxfordshire, actually I can't remember how much we've talked about this on our main episodes, but I know we've definitely discussed it with listeners as we've been talking about our visit to the Rollright stones, which is like a small standing stone circle in Oxfordshire. And we've posted pictures in the Facebook group, definitely, of the Clootie trees there.
Yeah, I think we did a patron
episode on it. Yeah. We posted pictures of this beautiful tree in front of the Rollright stones that's covered in ribbons. And that's what Clootie trees were usually associated with healing wells as well. And the idea originally was, I believe, is that you tore a strip of fabric and you dipped it in the healing well, and then you placed the damp strip of fabric sort of imbued with the healing waters on an affected part of your body that you wanted to be healed, and then you tied it on the tree. And the idea was that as the Clootie or rag or bit of fabric disintegrated, like broke down over time, so would your illness. Now, of course, the trouble is now, these days, Clootie trees are kind of very much a contentious subject because the fabric we have now a lot of times won't actually break down.
Yeah, it has man-made fibres in it and with plastics, and it doesn't break down and it can harm the tree, and it's littering and that sort of thing. So they can be a bit of an issue. So in this case, this was like a rag tree more perhaps than a Clootie tree. But yeah, so it's one of those things where the Clootie tree, rag tree, coin tree, they're all tend to be located near to healing wells. Now, the healing well on Isle Marie has dried up and been lost.
Oh, no.
But legend says that people would go to the healing well and they would partake of its healing powers and they would leave an offering on a tree stump.
Oh, a coin?
Potentially a coin, yes.
But not always.
It didn't really specify. It just said offering.
No. Okay, fair enough.
And again, like you say, they would often tie, or not tie, this is the interesting bit.
Okay.
With the rag tree, they would nail the cloth to the tree.
Well, that makes sense because, I mean, you don't always have a tree near a healing well where you can reach the branches. If that tree's too tall, you're going to do the next best thing, which is attach that rag to what you can reach, which is the trunk.
Yeah. And it seems like the healing well dried up.
Yeah.
But people were still visiting the island and using the rag tree.
Okay. And nailing their rags
into the tree. But it's obviously fallen out of favour a little bit because later on it seems like people had forgotten that they were nailing rags to a tree.
Because they disintegrated.
Because they'd disintegrated. So they were coming across this tree, like the well dried up, the tree had lots of nails in it.
And the rags had gone.
And people were like, oh, okay, well, the magic thing is obviously hammer a nail into the tree.
Oh, my goodness.
And then it sort of moved from there to anything metal.
Okay.
So there was like belt buckles and hairpins and things knocked into the tree.
So any kind of small metal thing that you'd just have in a pocket or like as part of your clothing.
Yep. Which presumably then went into coins.
Because
people carry coins.
The thing you're most likely to have made out of metal in your pocket.
Yes.
Ah, it all makes sense.
Now, sadly, it turns out that a lot of coins have metals in them that are quite harmful to trees if you hammer them into a tree.
Yeah, is it copper that's...
I think it's copper or zinc, something, but whatever it was, it killed the tree.
Oh.
And this is why people are generally told now not to do it in live trees because it will kill them. And obviously the coin tree there had died, rotted away, so there's not a lot remaining there as it stands.
Yeah.
But it sort of shows potentially where that evolution came from Clootie tree to nails to metal to coins, sort of birthing a coin tree.
And well, see, I found a slightly different version of the legend down in Cornwall. Well, two versions of it, actually. It's really interesting because I know there's a coin tree at the Lost Gardens of Heligan in Cornwall, which I've visited, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Unfortunately, it was years ago, so I don't remember the coin tree. I remember them having a crystal grotto, which is as good as it sounds. but I don't remember the coin tree, so I don't know whether that's a later edition. And on their website, they cite it as being like a wish tree, basically. And again, it's not a living tree. I think it's a log or a stump or something like that. But a Cornish blogger whose site is called Mike's Cornwall talks about the coin tree at Heligan and says the tradition behind it is something slightly different. And I wonder if this is a regional version of the legend. So he says that the leaving coins is all down to the Cornish piskies. And I'm not trying to say pixies and mangling it. Cornish piskies are a bit like pixies, but it is actually spelt and pronounced differently. But they are kind of similarly mythical, mysterious, and very mischievous fae-like creatures from ancient Cornish folklore. And they can be good luck, but they're the kind of things that you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of them. So in his blog, he says that the coins are to ensure safe passage on your journey. The piskies will apply an invisible charm on any passerby, but only if a small toll is played by placing a coin in the tree. Warning, if any passerby should take a coin from the tree, they will incur the wrath of the piskies, and you definitely wouldn't want that, is what he says. So I think in this case, we've got basically the idea that the coin is a toll for safe passage through, the landscape that belongs to the piskies, to these ancient mythical creatures. And that's really interesting. And also the fact that he mentions here that obviously taking a coin that somebody else has left as an offering is a really bad idea. And that runs through what we see from the lore around the coin trees as well.
Yeah, in what I was explaining about Armory, like that doesn't really come up as such because they were talking about making an offering after visiting the healing well, whereas locations that are mostly just coin tree, it tends to be explained by people that are aware of them as more of a sympathetic magic thing. Like if you're sick, you imbue the coin with your sickness, you hammer it into the log, and then if someone takes your coin away, then they get the illness that you were trying to get rid of.
Yeah, because you're essentially...
And that's your warning.
You're trying to take the illness out of your body and give it to the dead tree to be kind of reabsorbed and rotted down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you wouldn't want anybody else to then come along and pick up your coin with your illness. So no. So I'm really interested to know now if any of you guys have coin trees or coin logs or folklore about coin trees around your area that's different. Because, this is the most fascinating thing about folklore is that it's a living entity, isn't it? It changes with time and location and it evolves, and that evolution is just really, really fascinating. So I'd desperately love to hear if anybody else has different versions of these coin tree legends. I even saw a photo of one in Lincolnshire that's like a modern sculpture, a wooden sculpture, but like a carved wooden sculpture of a lizard, and it's in a country park. And somehow, I don't know how, but that has evolved into a coin log
that's strange.
Of its own, like a coin lizard.
And if you do know of a coin tree in your local area, watch out for Kerry Holbrook, because when I was reading
of the dissertation,
when I was reading her dissertation, what she was doing on occasion was going to a location of the coin tree and just sitting and waiting. And then if people came up and hammered
a little pisky.
Yeah, like a little pisky. And if someone went to hammer a coin into the tree, she'd walk up to them and go, "What to do that for?" Like to try and work out what they were aware of, like the history and the folklore that they were aware of.
Yeah.
Literally just trying to gather information. So
if you're
ever at a coin tree and somebody jumps out of a bush going, "What are you doing?" It might well be her.
It might just be a researcher. So yeah, I don't know how long the coin logs or coin trees have been part of Mother Shipton's cave. I don't know whether that's, like I say, whether that's more of a modern thing that they've put in because it ties into like the wishing well. But even the wishing well, I mean, in the original history, the dropping well, so that's the big one with like the water that comes over the top of a cliff from the underground spring. That was the main focus of the myth and the folklore and the activity of hanging things from the dropping well to be turned to stone. And I don't remember any mentions of the separate wishing well, which they have there now.
No, I remember reading about it in the guidebook before we went, but that's obviously a modern publication and that's obviously been set up there for quite a while. But with all the LED lights and stuff. That's clearly not Victorian.
No, but I don't know whether there was I don't know whether putting coins in a wishing well was ever part of the historical side of it, because the dropping well was obviously mentioned as early as like the 16th century.
Again. It's just weird, yeah.
But the dropping well was mentioned as early as the 16th century and was known before and was obviously thought of as very magical and mysterious, you know. And people were a little bit afraid of it as well, obviously, because it turned things to stone. So there was a small element of fear there. But then today, in the modern day, just next to the dropping well, we've got what they call the wishing well, which has obviously been well established for at least decades, because they say that people, you know, do make a wish in the wishing well and they write to them and tell them that their wish came true. And it's kind of a separate bit. It's where the water drips down sort of right through the middle of the rock and it collects in a little pool. And you kind of have to go into this little dark cavern and find it. And yeah, once you get in there, as Fitz says, it's all kind of done up with LED lights, which sounds a bit tacky, but it's actually quite pretty.
It does actually look pretty cool.
It's very cool. And you put your coin in and make a wish. So I don't know whether they've, you know, it could be the case that people were putting coins into the main dropping well and they wanted to separate it for, you know, just to keep it clear of stuff like that. I'm not sure how I wish I knew more about how these little traditions when they started. I wish I knew when the coin trees had started and when the wishing well started. But I mean, I think all these things, they have grown up organically almost as the folklore does. It's just kind of a development and it's building on the myth and mystery that has always been there. And I just feel like it's a really fascinating case study of how you can kind of track this legend and myth through time and how it's evolved and developed over the years, simply because it has been a tourist attraction for so long.
Yeah.
It's much
like
better
one of the
recorded.
world's oldest tourist attractions or something?
Yeah, well, I think it's England's oldest tourist, so I don't know about the world, but it's definitely one of, if not the England's oldest tourist attraction. I'll get my words out in a minute. Because it's been in constant operation since the 17th century as in literally people have sold tickets to go and see it. And so it's just the perfect case for showing how that the folklore attached to this destination has evolved over time. It's just really, really fascinating to me. The other thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about with regards to the dropping well and the long walk was that these days it operates the opposite way round to how it used to. So basically, Knaresborough has two very famous bridges. There's the High Bridge and the Low Bridge. And if you listen to the episode, you'll remember the High Bridge because of one of Mother Shipton's prophecies, because she predicted that the world would end when the High Bridge of Knaresborough had fallen thrice, 3 times, and it's only fallen twice so far. So we are on like our last warning, I guess. But that is the reason that there is a pub called the World's End Pub in Knaresborough, which we mentioned briefly. It's built on the other side of the bridge. So actually we drove over that bridge when we came in, because we came through Knaresborough town and past the World's End Pub and over the bridge to the gatehouse of Mother Shipton's. But on the other side, the other end of the long walk, because it's a long, it follows the river valley all the way down to the other side where there is the Low Bridge that also crosses the river. And next to that bridge, there's another pub. And this one is the Mother Shipton's Inn, or at least that's what it's called now. It used to be called the Dropping Well Inn, and then it changed its name to the Mother Shipton Inn, and then it changed its name back to the Dropping Well Inn again. And I think it's just ping-ponged back and forth through history. But the reason that pub ended up with the Mother Shipton's name is because it used to be the gatehouse for the attraction. So actually, where we bought our tickets when we visited the other end of the High Bridge was the end, back when it first opened. And certainly when they were selling tickets for it in sort of the Edwardian and Victorian times, people would have entered over the other bridge through the Mother Shipton's Inn or the Dropping Well Inn, depending on which year you were visiting, and they would have bought their tickets for the gate there. And in fact, in the guidebook, there's there's a couple of really interesting photographs. There's a black and white photograph of the Mother Shipton Inn, and it doesn't look any different to how it looks now, except that the cars parked outside how would you describe the old-fashioned car, like wooden wheels?
Yeah, with like runner boards and the button-back, wind-backed chairs.
Oh, yeah. The big, huge seats, yeah. So other than that, it really looks pretty much the same. It's very unchanged. It's this kind of, I guess, 17th century, maybe looking whitewashed building. It's a bit higgledy-piggledy. It's obviously been built on over time because there's a main segment that's one height, and then there's another little extra kind of building that's been tacked on the end that's a bit lower, and then right on the end there's another building that's been tacked on again even lower, so it's a bit of a jigsaw. And there's also a picture in the guidebook of one of the old tickets. It doesn't, unfortunately, the guidebook doesn't say what year the ticket was from, but entry fee at that time was 1 penny.
Bit cheaper than now.
Yes.
Although it's not incredibly expensive. It's not to say that you know, don't go because it's so expensive. It's not actually that bad.
No, it's not. It's pretty much I don't think it's quite a bargain, to be honest. I think it was about, if you go on foot and don't pay for parking, it's under £10 a person for an adult. It gets more expensive if you pay for parking like we did, but that, you know, that's a choice.
And we'd love to tell you loads more about the exciting history of the pub, but we couldn't find any history about the pub at all, other than what was in the guidebook and the photos. It was just nothing. No, it was a bit of a shame, really. And we were hoping to do more of a sort of filled out episode on this pub because, of course, it is haunted and there are plenty of ghosts there. But we just absolutely hit a brick wall trying to research the history. The only thing I could find anywhere was in the listed building, on the listed building site, Historic England. It's, you know, it's the website we normally go to for details about grade 2 listed and grade 1 listed buildings. But all it said was that it was 17th century. And the pub owner I read an interview from claimed it was a 16th century coaching inn. Now, see, that may not be untrue at all. The problem is with the Historic England website is that, as valuable as it is, they only assess the visible existing architecture. Because, to be fair, that's all, unless, you know, you're going to go ripping up floors and looking at the foundations, that's all you can see. That's all you can assess from a visible survey. But it doesn't mean that it is only as old as the 17th century. It may well be older. We find this so often with so many pubs, well, just historic buildings in general, but there tends to be less written about the history of pubs, which is a real shame. Yeah. And a perfect example of this sort of thing was, I used to manage a building that was known as a 16th or 17th century farmhouse. And before I took over the management, it had a big fire. And obviously that was awful. It destroyed so much. But when they were clearing the wreckage and talking about restoring the building, they came across a 13th century fireplace, which then redated the building another 300 years earlier. But because it was covered up by the more modern construction, they didn't know it was there. And often it's a bit of a catch-22 as well, because a building like this, you know, being 17th century, the pub I'm talking about, may well be old enough to be a grade 2 listed building and therefore protected. So you won't actually be allowed to do any work inside that could uncover earlier foundations or earlier fireplaces or anything that could date it earlier. And obviously those protections are very important and they're there for a reason, but sometimes it can actually be a roadblock in finding out the really accurate date of the building. It certainly does look like it could have been a coaching inn, though. It's got those low ceilings with the big, thick, dark oak beams, huge fireplaces, and the furniture, a lot of it looks antique. It's lots of dark wood, deep wine-coloured curtains, carved oak chairs, and there's all these little trinkets and knickknacks and antiques tucked into every nook and cranny, like brass toasting forks, cooking pots and bellows hung over the fireplace, and I think a painting of Mother Shipton, of course, over the fireplace, as she should be, surveying her domain. And in one corner, there's even an old church pew that's been pushed into service for seating. And this may be where some of the inn's ghosts like to hang out. One evening, some regular customers were sitting at the bar just enjoying their drinks when they noticed that there were two people sitting in that very pew. And whilst you might not immediately think that that would be unusual for a pub, the two customers reported that the figures then simply vanished into thin air as they sat there and watched. It's obvious that the pub's owners have gone to a lot of effort to try and reflect the inn's long history and its interior decor, but I found an interview from 2019 with a group called Paranormal Hauntings. So they're paranormal investigators and they've got a YouTube channel, and I'll link the whole interview in this description.
But when they first took over the pub, the landlord said that they had to do a lot of cleaning up and clearing out to get it looking nice. So for starters there, I mean, I'm sure everybody can hear the alarm bells ringing. You've got new owners of a haunted pub with hundreds of years of history, and they're about to start doing renovations. So I'm sure we can all guess what happens next. And you will not be disappointed, especially because the pub owner in the interview describes himself as a skeptic and almost exactly utters our favourite ever phrase, "I don't believe in any of that stuff, but..." And it does seem as though the activity started almost as soon as they moved in. At night, they would hear doors banging open and closed, and they would be really convinced that there was an actual intruder in the pub and tear downstairs to check and see who was there. But of course, they never found anyone, and they never found anything out of place. And they say now that they've been there for a while, they actually recognise what the exact noise is. And it's the sound of the toilet doors closing by themselves.
Oh, right.
So they, having been there for a long time now, they know all the sounds of the building so well, they can recognise that that's what the sound is. And they say they just don't, they've been down to check so many times, especially now they know where to look, that they just ignore it now because they know there's nobody down there, and they're just really used to it happening. But whilst they were doing the initial deep clean of the building, they had some family staying to help them out. And one of their family members kept experiencing things dropping on them, especially coins that would just literally fall out of midair and land on them from nowhere.
The coins again.
I know.
Is the coins that you put in the wishing well just providing ammunition at this point for the ghosts?
Do you put them in the wishing well and they just go straight through it like a gravity hole and drop out in the pub? That would be so cool. Yeah, so they were just having these objects, particularly coins, just falling out of nowhere and landing on them, and they couldn't explain it. And that same family member, that wasn't the end of it for them either. They later witnessed a figure emerge out of an old cupboard and enter the pub's upstairs quarters, like the living quarters where the landlord and his wife were staying. So they thought it was an actual intruder again, somebody trying to break in, and they took their dogs up with them when they went to check it out. They got up there, as you can guess, they found nobody, nothing to be seen at all. But one of their dogs started barking madly at the doorway where the figure had disappeared into, as though there was an actual intruder there. But they would not go inside. The dog stood there barking madly and refused to enter the room. Obviously, the landlord did enter the room and check, and there was, in fact, nobody there, but they still, to this day, don't know what that dog was barking at and why they wouldn't go into the room where the figure had disappeared. The landlord's wife also had her own experience that absolutely terrified her when she was downstairs alone in the bar one morning. All the glasses and glassware behind the bar started moving on its own, and she was terrified. She ran upstairs to get her husband, and by the time he'd come down, it had stopped. But he was to have his own experience. One night when he was serving at the bar, he spotted two people going upstairs. Now, he assumed that they were customers that were looking for the loo and had got a bit lost. So he excused himself from the people he was serving and went upstairs to retrieve them and point them in the right direction. But as you've all probably guessed, he found no one anywhere on the upper floor, and the two figures had simply vanished. But maybe one of the oddest apparition sightings was by two regulars of the pub. Now, the owner says they used to practice in an adjoining room, and it's kind of an old barn that's been converted, and it's got a bit of a gallery. So although he doesn't say what they were practicing, I assume maybe he means musicians, because that's kind of, I used to practice with my band in a pub. It's quite a common thing to do. He says that when they were in there, they always used to draw the door curtain across the door behind them after they shut themselves in. So this would imply to me that you wouldn't just be able to sort of crack the door and sneak in, because you'd see the door curtain kind of flapping as you tried to make an entrance. But they say that despite no one coming into the room with them, as they were practicing in the gallery, they looked over at the entrance and saw a group of people dressed in Victorian clothing standing right in front of the closed door, the still closed door, just watching them.
Ooh, that's a bit creepy.
Yeah. I mean, it's not desperately the audience that you want at a band practice, is it? When I was watching bits of video around the pub and looking at photos of it, I think it's hardly surprising that there might be so much activity there. When you look at the place, it's absolutely jam-packed with antiques, historical furniture. There's a framed letter from, I think, maybe Queen Victoria or something, like a painting of Mother Shipton. There's so many little old knickknacks tucked around the place that even without the whatever's in the building itself, any one of those items could have bought something with it. There's one of the things they have there that was shown in the YouTube video I'll link for you. It's a big old wrought iron deed chest that used to belong to Henry Slingsby. It's those Slingsbys again.
Mm-hmm.
So, that name will probably be familiar to all of you. And there's so much more stuff there that I would have loved the owner to talk a bit more about in the video, because I could see all these little knickknacks that were pictured, and I just wanted to know their history. He does mention in it, though, that a lot of the furniture they inherited with the pub. So it's not even like, they may have done in some instances, but they haven't filled it with antiques that they've bought in. A lot of it has been there for probably, potentially centuries. So it's kind of unsurprising to me that there's potentially multiple ghosts there. And the last thing that happens, which, is kind of furniture related, and it's not surprising, again, talking about how some of the furniture has probably been there for decades, if not centuries, is that they often have drinks and glasses just fly off the tables. 2 tables in particular, and one of them, the landlord himself has actually witnessed this activity where the glasses just fly inexplicably off the table.
And one of the tables this happens at was supposedly owned by Guy Fawkes. It's a big, heavy, solid oak table, and it has a plaque on it that says, "This table from Scotton Hall belonged to Guy Fawkes when he resided there in the year 1592. And try as I might, I could find absolutely nothing about this Guy Fawkes table anywhere. And I couldn't even confirm that he did in fact live at Scotton Hall.
So Scotton Hall is nearby, isn't it?
Yes, it's in Knaresborough. It's not as grand as it sounds from
a lot of halls aren't, though. Often you hear the word hall, and I always imagine like this grand sort of palace. But a lot of the times the name hall has come from the designation of being a manor. So it was where the landed gentry lived. But, depending on how far back you go, that was often just a farmhouse. A manor was quite a simple farmhouse.
Well, back in the day, farmhouses were like, farmers were people that owned land and had other people work for them. So they tended to be wealthy and grander.
So they probably were bigger houses and more grand houses than other people had, but not on the levels that we often imagine something called a hall to be these days.
Mm-hmm. So in my research, like I say, I was really struggling to find confirmation that Guy Fawkes lived there. He certainly has a connection, because I found out that the steward of Fountains Abbey, Walter Pullen, lived at Scotton Hall. And this rather confusing connection appears. It says he married Frances Vavassor, whose son by a previous marriage married Edith Fawkes, Guy Fawkes' mother. So Guy Fawkes had a connection to the building, definitely spent his youth in Knaresborough, possibly at Scotton, but I couldn't say for certain that was the case.
Yeah, see, this is just a great example of why it takes us so long to research the scripted episodes, because just take that one sentence there. You can spend half a day trying to untangle that and get to the bottom of whether the man actually lived where he was claimed to have lived or not.
Indeed. And this kind of took me down a Guy Fawkes rabbit hole.
Oh, do tell.
I've got lots of Guy Fawkes facts.
Oh.
And Guy Fawkes' ghost is said to be seen in several different locations as well. So,
I can imagine.
So yes, our first Guy Fawkes fact is
Fawkes
that
facts.
In the village of Scotton, they celebrate bonfire night like the rest of us.
Right.
But they don't burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes like many places do.
Oh, so they're definitely leaning into the Guy Fawkes connect. As far as they're concerned, Guy Fawkes is their lad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And another place, and apparently they thought they were the only place that did this, York St. Peter's School, where Guy Fawkes was educated, also believe it's bad form to burn an effigy of an old boy.
Well, yes,
but
that makes sense.
They thought they were the only people that did that. But I found, obviously, Scotland do the same thing as well.
Interesting.
Indeed. So, apparently, there is supposed to be a ghost of Guy Fawkes at Scotland Hall. But
okay.
I don't think anybody's seen it. It's just heard footsteps
recently.
and shadows and things. So they kind of attribute it to Guy Fawkes because he's kind of the most famous connection. But there's nothing really to back that up. But there's a similar occurrence in York because you've got the Guy Fawkes Inn in York.
Right.
And again, they've seen shadowy figures, heard footsteps, and they're not quite as bold to say it's definitely Guy Fawkes. But they think that it might be.
Well, you'd hope that, wouldn't you? If you were called the Guy Fawkes Inn, if you were called the Guy Fawkes Inn, you'd hope that was the ghost.
Yep, there are other ghosts there. 2 young children that apparently haunt the Belfry Suite. But yeah, so there's figures seen, noises, feelings of unease, and sometimes a figure in a cloak is seen, and that seems to be the one that people are most happy to say is potentially Guy Fawkes. Other activity that happens, guests have reported the TVs turning on in the dead of night with no cause, or a ghostly apparition of a woman who walks up the steps to the attic from time to time. There's also the cottage where Guy was actually born, which still stands in the beer garden of the inn.
Oh, so that's why the inn is called the Guy Fawkes, because it's literally next to the building that he was born in. I didn't realise that.
The cottage that he was born in is on the property, and it's a guest house now. So apparently guests have checked out in the middle of the night because activity has occurred there.
Oh, I really want to go and stay there.
Yeah, I think we might have to at some point. And I think they do sort of paranormal investigations there as well. I've seen a few groups that have done it. Maybe we can get together with Mr. Deathly and do a combined effort. Which brings me on to my next ghost story. Yes. And this is my favourite one because Dorian Deathly, ghost tour guide in York, who we had on the show a little while ago, absolutely brilliant, love him. He told us a fantastic story about Guy Fawkes. In that his ghost can be seen occasionally along a street in York asking people if they would like to see his collection of sticks.
Yeah, I'll never forget that because the guy, pun not intended, the man just loved collecting sticks. And if you haven't heard that story, Mr. Deathly tells it so much better than we did. So please go back to that episode where we interviewed him and he tells that story properly for you. But it is a corker.
Indeed. So leaving York and heading down to London, where obviously the gunpowder plot took place, Guy Fawkes was imprisoned in the Tower of London, and it said, and he was obviously tortured there, and it said that his howls of pain can often be heard in the Tower of London, though how they could differentiate it from other people's howls of pain, I'm not entirely sure.
Well, he's just one of these ghosts, I'm getting the impression, a bit like he's another Anne Boleyn. And I know we've talked about that on the show before, where just there are so many Anne Boleyn ghosts all over the country, and we're not really sure why all this ghostly activity is attributed to Anne Boleyn, but her name is just pinned on so many houses. Is it the same for Mr. Fawkes?
Well, he does get around, and there's even a local connection for us.
Okay.
Because the manor house in Ashby St Ledgers near Daventry, which is only sort of half an hour away from us.
Yeah, it's close.
Yes, is another place where Guy Fawkes is said to haunt.
What's his connection there then?
Well, he conspired there with fellow Catholics to arrange the gunpowder plot.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because Robert Catesby was a local as well, wasn't he? He was one of the conspirators, and I think I remember a local connection to him as well.
It may well have in fact been that, and I'm sure I'd written down the name in my notes, but I haven't. So we will just have to move on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Robert Catesby was a local boy, and in fact, I'm sure he hails from a house that's only sort of 15 minutes away from us. I just can't remember the exact name of it right now, but that would make sense.
Yep, and I found a very, very strange story.
Okay.
There is a lady who at the time was living in London called the Viscountess Boudica, and she believes that she's married the ghost of Guy Fawkes.
Oh, this is a recent story.
Yeah, fairly. The thing is 2016, 2018,
Okay.
something like that. Like modern.
Modern, yes, that's what I was getting at. A modern time story, not like an ancient legend.
Yeah, and she lived in Bethnal Green, she visited the Tower of London, and she had a supernatural encounter with Guy Fawkes.
Okay.
And then believed that she has entered into a mystical union, and he accompanies her constantly as her guardian angel.
Right.
I'm not going to comment any further on that. I'm
That's an odd one.
going to put a link to the article so you can have a read for yourself. I really don't know what to make of it, but I just had to put it in because it was
That's
Guy
so
Fawkes
strange.
but it was very strange.
Good Fawkes facts there.
I've got more Fawkes facts for you.
More Fawkes facts.
For any fans of the BBC series Ghosts,
and we are massive fans.
and we are massive fans, Guy Fawkes has a connection to West Horsley Place where it was filmed.
Oh.
Apparently, the second Lord Montague, owner of the house, was imprisoned on suspicion of being involved in the gunpowder plot because he employed Guy Fawkes as a footman.
As a footman? That's odd. I thought Guy Fawkes was, this is just showing my ignorance here, I thought he was sort of a landed gentry type and not the kind of person that would have been a footman.
I'm not sure. He got around a bit. I know he fought in Spain for a while, and that's where the Guido Fawkes and whatnot came from.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know if he became wealthy from war, like gained rank in war, or whether he was a lord. He was obviously changed religions and he had a very strange life.
So he's a very, very colourful character.
Definitely.
I think we need to look more into Mr. Guido Fawkes there. There's obviously a lot I don't know about him, and I'm lacking in my knowledge here.
Indeed. Fawkes fact. Apparently, Guy Fawkes was potentially going to be one of the characters in Disney's Haunted Mansion, but for some reason he wasn't included.
Oh my goodness, I had no idea. Why on earth would they pick Guy Fawkes to be a character in the Haunted Mansion?
I honestly couldn't say. And he also has another connection to somewhere else that we've been, Donington Laheath Manor in Leicestershire.
Oh, we love that place.
Indeed, and this was likely owned and possibly haunted by one of Guy Fawkes' co-conspirators, Sir Everard Digby.
Oh, really? Again, somewhere we would definitely recommend going if you can get out there. We love Donington Laheath Manor House. It's brilliant.
And final Fawkes fact.
Last one of the day.
Just got one more for you. Did you know that every year the cellars underneath Parliament are thoroughly checked before the annual state opening of Parliament, just in case anyone is attempting another gunpowder plot?
They're still on a specific day, so not on bonfire night.
No, before the state opening of Parliament, they check the cellars to make sure that nobody has planted explosives.
Oh my goodness. Still to this day. How many hundreds of years ago was that? Crikey.
I believe it's been about 400 years.
Oof.
And that was my final Fawkes fact. I'm sure there are more, but that's all I researched.
I quite enjoyed that new segment that you've just birthed here. Well, after that little Guy Fawkes detour, where it was really to tell you about the pub. Unfortunately, we didn't get time to visit the pub for ourselves, which is a real shame. There were so many parts of Knaresborough I just wish we could have visited. And if we get a chance to go back, we'll have to do another episode talking a little bit more about how our experiences, were when we actually get to visit these places.
Return to Mother Shipton.
Return to Mother Shipton. But I think the only thing I haven't told you about yet is Agatha Christie's handbag. Now, if anybody follows our Instagram, you will have probably seen me post my rather ridiculously random to-do list that I wrote. I genuinely wrote whilst writing the last episode. And that was part of, looking at that list was part of what made me realise there was so much we hadn't managed to fit into the episode, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this extra one. So what was Agatha Christie's handbag all about? That was a bit random. Well, as we said, these days, the end of the long walk is where the beginning used to be now. And right at our end, what was the beginning of the long walk, is the little gift shop and museum. And it's just one building, and it's quite a small building. Mm-hmm. So when I say museum, don't be thinking of it's kind of, some big lofty thing. It's tiny, tiny little building. But they've crammed loads of stuff in there. It's really lovely. They've got one end is all done up as like a witch's apothecary.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a full life-size figure of Mother Shipton sort of collecting mysterious herbs. And I think they've got a figurine of Henry Slingsby as well, haven't they, with his whippet or greyhound or something.
I'm not sure I saw that. I was too busy looking at all the goodies to buy.
The goodies, yes.
Getting the postcards for our patrons and a bottle of well water to
Wishing
take
well
home.
water, yeah, absolutely. Finding our crystal ball. But in the rest of the museum, they've got display cabinets, and they have a collection of things that famous people who have visited the dropping well have left behind to be hung over the well and petrified. I think the most famous person that's been there was Queen Mary, and they have her petrified shoes from her visit in 1923. They also have a petrified soldier's hat that was worn during the making of James Bond movie Die Another Day. They have John Wayne's petrified hat, and not one from a film set, one he was actually wearing when he visited in 1970, and he took it off his head and handed it to the owners of the park to be petrified. And they have Agatha Christie's handbag. Right. I don't think Agatha Christie ever actually visited. I might have got this wrong, but I believe the handbag was donated by the Agatha Christie sort of society or something after her death, because I think when she went missing, she actually went to somewhere near Knaresborough. I think it might have been Harrogate. That might have been where they found her.
I remember it being nearby.
Yeah, I think it was Harrogate. So it's a bit of a tenuous connection. I don't think Agatha Christie actually popped her own handbag in the dropping well, but it's the museum is really interesting, and they have other displays on there as well. I think they had an artist's an artist's exhibition in the centre point. And the other thing they had that I'm kicking myself now because we didn't take time to look at it properly was they had a Zoltar fortune telling machine, just like the one in the movie Big.
Yeah, I really wanted to try it, but we were so close on being kicked out that we just didn't have, we were rushing through the museum because I think it was literally about 5 to 4 and we had to leave at 4 or something like that. And we were just like, we've got to go before they ticket the car or do what have you. Not that they did. We ended up being about 15 minutes late and nobody said a word.
No.
But we were like, oh God, are we going to get
day.
clapped or something?
It was a very quiet day, and I think that might have been a different story. They might have been rather cross if it had been a really busy day, because the thing is the car park's not big, and I think that's why they have the timed entries. Yeah. That is the only thing I would say, was that it wasn't a long time slot. When you buy your tickets, you have to book a time to go in, and I suspect it's just because it's not the biggest site, it's not a particularly big car park, so you're not going to be able to get many people in there at once. So you only have, I think it was like 3 hours, the time slot. Yeah. But once you've parked and walked up to the attraction, and then you've got to allow the same amount of time to walk back, you've only got like 2.5 hours, which is not that long. There's so much to look at when you're there.
Especially if you're like us and you're busy taking photos and video and waiting for other people to move out of the way so that we're not filming them as we do our sort of tour. So, yeah, and they're very clear on the notice. Like,
it's very
don't park your car and go for a walk into town. It's just, turn up at the time that you meant to turn up and then leave by the time that you meant to leave. And if you finish early, please go. It's like, please get out of here.
Get out of here.
But none of the staff there felt like that at all.
No,
like,
I was
I'm
just
not going
about
to say that we felt rushed or that anyone was like tapping their watch going, come on people, you're taking too long. They were all lovely.
Yeah, they were absolutely brilliant. We never felt rushed at all. It was just that we were aware that we had overstayed, basically. And of course, it didn't matter too much because it was such a quiet day, but I wouldn't have wanted to do that when it was a really busy day and other people were waiting to get in, because that wouldn't be fair, of course.
No, but I didn't get my Zoltar fortune telling.
No, and I didn't even manage somehow, even though I tried to film a bit and take some pictures in the museum, I didn't manage to get it on any shot, which I'm so gutted about.
Just see like the side of it in one of the bits of video. So if you're eagle-eyed on the video, you'll just about spot it.
I couldn't even see it. So if any of our listeners are local and they do decide to go and visit Mother Shipton's and you pop into the museum, please take a photo of the Zoltar machine for us and ask if it works, because I really want to know. I'm so gutted that we were rushing so much. I kind of noticed it was there and didn't do anything about it. And we would definitely recommend that if you can visit, it is absolutely worth a day out. We had an amazing time. I bet if you go around Christmas, it's absolutely magical. It certainly was at Halloween. And I can imagine it must be an amazing experience for children as well. Like, we're just two big kids, really, and we had the most fantastic time. I think it's worth every penny. And you're not just, I mean, we often talk when we say about visiting these places, you know, we've always promoted the idea of, you know, you don't have to necessarily go on a paranormal investigation. You absolutely can visit haunted locations and locations of myth and lore and legend as a tourist. And actually, that's really helpful in keeping those places going. It's one of the things that does appear in a lot of Mother Shipton's literature, is that it is a privately owned site. It doesn't really get any funding from anywhere else. So as a historic location, it is completely reliant on people buying tickets and visiting to just upkeep it. And it does require quite a lot of upkeep. The woods need to be maintained because we're talking about trees that are hundreds of years old. Like, they need maintenance for it to be safe for people to visit. The well itself, the dropping well, has to be scraped so that the calcite deposits don't build up so much that it eventually collapses. Like, there's a lot that goes into keeping that site accessible so that we can all enjoy that folklore. But the other thing is, as we've mentioned before in this episode, folklore is a living organism. It evolves and develops over time. And Mother Shipton's is just such a wonderful place that every time somebody visits, you're literally growing that folklore. You're becoming part of its evolution. And that is just magical in itself. So I know this was a bit of a different episode to normal. We threw away the template somewhat, but I hope you can understand why we wanted to just sit down and have a good old chat about all the exciting, interesting little nuggets that didn't fit into the main episode. And I hope you all still enjoyed it.
And just before we go, I just wanted to say that if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, then please do get in touch through our website at notonceVS.com. Your stories are the lifeblood of the show, and we are always in need of new, true paranormal experiences.
So that's it from us for now, but you will be hearing from us again very soon indeed, because it is nearly time for the annual Christmas episode, and of course, the traditional Not Once for Yes Christmas quiz. So until then, take care, lovely listeners, and you'll hear from us very soon.